me paint you a picture. It's 2011. I'm in high school at a Friday night football game. I, along with my two best friends, are wearing our sweatshirts that display the words Cookie Girls on the back. I didn't understand a single rule about football, but for social acceptance, I knew I needed to be there. A lot of my upbringing felt this way, pretending to care about things I didn't in order to assimilate. It was my way of preventing any potential rejection that might come my way, especially the kind I felt post 9/11 as an Iranian American. But there's more to this picture. For as long as I can remember, my high school alma mater had a racist and offensive mascot used in honor of Native American culture. And that group I was in, the Cookie Girls, well, our job was to make cookies for our guy friends in another group called TP Crew. You heard that right, and it might be what you picture, a group of shirtless boys running out of a teepee onto the field to pump up the crowd before a big game. At this game, all around me, parents, students, teachers, administrators, they were all chanting in unison and waving their hand in the air like a tomahawk, meant to mimic some caricature of a native war cry. And I, a first-generation Iranian American desperate to fit in, joined in, not proudly, not thoughtlessly, but because it was what we were all doing. You see, there had already been one failed attempt in my lifetime to change the mascot because the district worked really hard to make sure students felt proud and connected to the mascot. They really created this sense that if you didn't agree with it, you didn't belong, you weren't one of us. And so when activists had tried to change it in my lifetime, the district actually organized students to speak in favor of keeping it. And I kind of already had a reputation of not exactly fitting the mold. Did I mention I really didn't even understand how football works? So questioning the chant or speaking up against it, it felt out of the question. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. I knew we were wrong. I said so to some of my friends, but I didn't push, I didn't act. I really didn't know I could, and I definitely didn't know how. So I stayed quiet. And that moment stayed with me. Not just the teepee, the chant, the mascot, or the gesture, but that silence, the feeling of being powerless, of knowing I really wanted to make a change, but not knowing how. Years later, I was at a family dinner, and it was brought up that the Washington's football team was reconsidering their mascot, and just like that, I was back in those bleachers, surrounded by that chant and overwhelmed by that same shame. Except something was different. I was no longer just a previous student, I was a mom. And I had just moved back to my local community with a new perspective. I started to think about my son. What will happen when he's in that stadium and he's asked to join in? What if he's running out of that TV? And I had this sinking feeling in my gut. This is so not the world I want my kid to grow up in. It wasn't okay with me when I was a student then, and it certainly wasn't okay with me now as a mom, but there was a difference between then and now. In the time since school, I had become a trained community organizer. I had the tools, I had the knowledge, I had the people, and I no longer felt powerless. I knew I could do something about this. I also understood something I didn't back then, that it's not enough to feel in your gut that something is wrong. It's not enough to simply know how things should be. Change is necessary, and change happens when we organize. When you build shared power through relationships that are strong enough to change something that once felt immovable. 10 years into my professional organizing career, and I have countless stories to demonstrate this. And right now, in a moment when many of us feel angry and afraid, when we have that sinking feeling that this is not what we want for our children, when we may even feel powerless, I want to bring insight to why I believe and deeply know that we do have power. When we work collectively, we can overcome barriers that once felt insurmountable. That's what organizing is. It isn't a viral tweet or a fiery speech or a single protest. It's not even this TEDx talk. Organizing is the slow and steady work of weaving people and resources together long enough, strategically enough, and intentionally enough to make change, to make lasting change. And that's what my sister and I did after that family dinner. We built a campaign, we organized, and we changed that racist mascot. To organize, in my view, you take on many roles, but four in particular. You become a deeply curious student, you become a talent scout, you become a social architect, and you become a builder. And like so many of the organizing campaigns I worked on, whether it's been disaster recovery after a hurricane, or base building in North Tulsa, or fighting for reparations, we started our work on the mascot campaign in the same place as students. Organizers should never enter a community or campaign or movement thinking they are an expert. Campaigns and movements are built on the history and insight and intrinsic knowledge that is already within our communities. And the truth is, as an organizer, you are never entering that space alone. We had to understand that there was a long history of Indigenous leaders fighting for fair and accurate representation, much longer than we had been, because organizers are always sitting within the realm of what came before them and what legacy you're leaving behind. And you ought to learn that before you try to do any campaign or act on anything. That's why that's the first step to be a student. You have to understand and seek who and what has come before you and what your role in it is. And that's what we did in our campaign. We started with questions like, what was the history of the mascot of the school, which was 75 years long? And why did previous efforts fail? What was our role as non-Indigenous leaders? And once we'd understood that and really gotten our grounding, we continued as talent scouts. My sister and I reached out to classmates, administrators, students, teachers, alumni. We created an online space where people could speak freely, and what we found was decades of painful memories. We gave people a space where they could be honest, and some of them were, some for the very first time. And the first step to responding to that pain, it wasn't strategy, not yet. It was people. This is where becoming an organizing talent scout comes in. We started asking ourselves, who would we build this movement with? It wasn't necessarily the person with the most charisma or the loudest voice, or even the most polished resume. Being an organizing talent scout means looking for things others might not see. It's about understanding someone's individual interest and how you might move them into action around their interest. It means seeing leadership in the parent who's never spoken up at a board meeting and is working multiple jobs to make ends meet, or the student who has a quiet voice but a story that could bring the room to tears, or that person that says, I am so not political, I'm not an advocate, I'm not the right person, but they can fill a room with 10 people just with a phone call. In our campaign, I saw this over and over, people stepping into roles they never imagined for themselves. Coaches writing support letters, parents speaking out for the first time, teachers organizing coalitions of students. And as an organizer, our job isn't to force or direct someone, it's to ask questions and walk alongside someone to connect action to their deepest motivations. A successful organizer is able to activate in others what they might not already see, and to create the conditions for them to direct that power towards collective change. Because when someone names your power out loud, it's hard to ignore. You begin to see yourself differently. But identifying leaders isn't just enough. You have to actually build the space to contain them. It's not just about gathering people once. It's about intentionally designing how they come together and creating a space that can hold all that comes along with them. My sister and I worked side by side to build a coalition that could carry the weight of this moment. We brought together students, alumni, teachers, parents, administrators, and Indigenous leaders who had been at this fight way longer than us. people who had never shared space before, who brought different lived experiences, different stakes in the conversation. And yet, somehow, in almost no time, we built a space strong enough to hold it through to the end. That's what it means to be a social architect, to build a bridge strong enough for others to walk across. And once that space existed, it was time to build, not just a campaign, but a foundation. The fourth role of an organizer is to turn momentum into a muscle, to create something that outlasts a single moment and reflects the values we say we believe in. It was never our goal to shame the school. It was to invite it into alignment with its own institutional values. To say, if we as a school believe in respect, integrity, inclusion, then we need to live into those values even when it's uncomfortable. We weren't just pushing for a mascot change, we were making room for our community, ourselves, and the school to grow. Building is how we did it. We started by organizing large crowds of people at school board meetings, like I said, people from all different backgrounds, to demonstrate our collective power. Then we helped craft messaging that was clear and direct. People who had never spoken up at board meetings had a platform and support to make their voices heard. The overwhelming public support at those meetings convinced the school board to create a committee to reconsider changing the mascot. And again, we got to building. This time, we built networks of influence, making sure that coalition members were on that committee or that we had direct lines of communication with committee members. And ultimately, the committee recommended that the district change the mascot, and we moved on to our next phase of building. We built a signature campaign that was targeted at school board members, and on November 9th, 2020, the day the school board was set to vote on that mascot change proposal, we packed that room. We organized a media presence. We packed the house, bringing to bear months of collective work and dedication. And that evening, the school board voted unanimously to change the mascot. But the incredible thing about this movement we built, and so many others that I've named, is that it didn't end with just achieving that first goal. When we invest in ourselves and each other and the institutions around us, we create the foundation for progress beyond one single moment. After the mascot change, we actually worked with those networks to elect the first Black and Hispanic Latinx school board members that district had ever seen. Thank you. And as a current parent in that school district, I now have a pathway to create change because of how this experience built up my own sense of power, my community's skills and capacity, and the school's ability to make courageous steps forward. As one of my greatest mentors often says, Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, you sometimes have to be the bridge to other people's belief. In our world today, there are so many reasons that make it easy to believe things can't or won't change. True organizers light the path for why and how change can happen. And this work, the learning, the scouting, the building, it's not flashy, it's not fast, but it's how real, lasting change happens. Change within ourselves, each other, and our institutions. In my time as an organizer, I have learned to use my voice. I have learned that power isn't given, it's within us. I have learned that change is possible, and I'm definitely not the same little girl I once was. Even though I still really don't understand football, I might need someone to explain that to me. I don't sit in silence. I am not afraid of speaking out. Because in a world that often worships the quick fix or the solo savior, I am here to say true heroes are movement builders. They're not the ones getting the spotlight. They're the ones holding the community together when the lights go out. They're the ones creating the conditions for others to rise. They're the ones who understand and know that justice doesn't just appear, it's built. And here's the thing I want you to remember. Anyone can be an organizer, but no one becomes one alone. I was able to do this work because people invested in me, not just emotionally, financially, structurally, intentionally. They trained me, they paid me, they gave me space to grow. And if we want to live in a world where justice and liberation are possible, we have to start treating organizing as a serious job and a serious skill set. We have to invest in it the same way we invest in startups, campaigns, or other institutions, because this work is institution building too. So yes, be inspired by movements, but don't just cheer them on. Fund them, train for them, join them. Because we don't need a lone hero to save the day. We need more people willing to build the next one. Thank you.